All right, so today we're diving into some pretty interesting territory.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at Aleister Crowley and specifically his system of magic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is one that I know a lot of people have opinions on Crowley.
Yeah, he's one of those figures people have definitely heard of.
Yeah.
And they may or may not actually know a lot of the details.
Exactly.
And so it's good to go to the source.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing. We're going straight to his book, Magic in Theory and Practice.
Right.
And, I think the goal here is, for someone listening who maybe hasn't read this,
Yeah.
to really understand, what are the core ideas here?
Right, because he's a figure who's been mythologized.
Total.
And so trying to get down to
What did he actually believe?
yeah, what did he actually say?
Yeah.
Is a really important endeavor.
Totally. So I guess maybe just to start off then, what is magic, according to Crowley?
Yeah, so I think his most famous definition is that magic is the science and art of causing change and conformity with will.
Okay, the science and art. That's interesting, right?
Right, because he wants to differentiate this from what he would call stage magic.
Right, like pulling a rabbit out of a hat.
Right, exactly. So he spells it with a K
Right.
to kind of differentiate it.
To distinguish.
To distinguish it, yeah.
So it's not just superstition or something. He sees it as something that has a real, almost like a scientific basis.
Yeah, and he talks about it as a technology of consciousness.
Okay.
Right, that this is something that these practices, these rituals,
These ideas
are meant to produce actual changes in yourself, in your consciousness, in your experience of reality.
Interesting. So when he says causing change and conformity with will, what does he mean by will there?
So for him, will is the, it's the force of your desire, but it's also deeper than that. It's it's the core of your being.
Okay.
It's almost like this force that emanates from your truest self. And so it's not just I want this thing, therefore I'm just going to will it into being.
Right.
It's more like aligning yourself
With that deeper
will.
And then are you able to affect change in the world through that?
Exactly. Yeah. So by getting in touch with that deeper will, and then using these techniques, these practices.
Right. Which he calls formulae.
Yes, he calls them formulae.
And I know that's one that can kind of throw people off because they think oh, is this a magic spell or something?
Right.
But it's not like that, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, he's using the word formulae
Right.
in a more scientific sense.
Right.
If you combine these elements in this particular way,
Right.
and you apply this kind of pressure or this kind of heat, then something will happen.
Right, like a recipe almost.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's why he uses that language of science and art, because there's
precision to it.
Precision to it, yeah.
But then there's also this kind of intuitive, artistic side as well, I guess.
Exactly. You have to be able to kind of feel your way through it
and,
experiment and see what works.
Okay, so we're dealing with these formula. And one thing that he talks about a lot in his work is the tetragrammaton.
Right.
Now, for people who aren't familiar with that, what is that and why is it important in Crowley's system?
Right. So the tetragrammaton, first of all, let's just define it. It's the four-letter name of God in Hebrew.
Okay.
And it's often transliterated as, YHVH.
Right.
And it's been a subject of a lot of, mystical speculation and interpretation for centuries.
Yeah.
And Crowley's no different. He sees it as a really important symbol.
Right.
For understanding the nature of reality, for understanding the nature of divinity.
Okay.
So he sees it as representing different levels of reality, different planes of existence.
Okay.
And he also sees it as representing kind of the masculine and feminine principles.
Okay.
And the interaction between those principles.
So it's almost like a blueprint.
A blueprint, yeah.
For how reality is structured.
Exactly.
So according to Crowley.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're starting to see some of the kind of building blocks of his system here.
Yes.
But one of the things that I think is really interesting is that he doesn't just see magic as something that you do in a ritual context, right?
Right.
He has this idea that every act is, in a sense, a magical act.
Yes, absolutely.
Every thought, every intention is shaping reality.
Yeah, he says, every thought is a magical act.
Which is a lot of pressure.
It is.
To put on every little thing we do.
Right, but it's also empowering.
Okay.
Right, because it means that, we're not just these kind of passive victims of circumstance.
Right.
We have the ability to actually shape our reality.
Right. So it's not just about like, oh, I'm going to go and do my magical ritual now. It's like, no, every moment
Every interaction
is potentially.
yes, potentially shaping the course of your life.
Wow. Okay. So if that's the case, if we're all kind of doing magic all the time, whether we realize it or not,
Right.
what are some of the ways that Crowley suggested that we could become more conscious of that power?
Right. So that's where we get into some of the more, I guess, hands-on techniques.
Okay. So like, what are some of those techniques? Like, I know he talks about invocation, evocation, like those sound kind of,
Yeah, those are big ones.
Yeah.
And I think, it's easy to kind of go down the rabbit hole of like, what do those words actually mean?
Right.
But I think for Crowley, the important thing is to understand like the kind of energetic, like what's actually happening on an energetic level.
Okay.
Right. So with invocation, you're talking about essentially calling upon something outside of yourself.
Okay. So that could be like a deity.
It could be a deity. It could be an archetype.
Okay.
It could be a force of nature.
Right. So you're trying to connect with something.
Connect with something, draw it into yourself, and then, kind of allow it to work through you.
Interesting.
So it's very much about like a bringing down of energy.
Okay. So it's almost like you're trying to embody that energy in a sense.
Exactly. Yeah. And he talks about this in the context of, ritual magic.
Right.
Where you might actually, visualize yourself taking on the form of a deity or, feeling their presence within you.
Wow.
But you can also think about it in more, I guess, mundane terms.
Okay.
Like, if you're an artist
Right.
and you're trying to tap into your creativity,
Right.
you might invoke the muse.
Right. Okay.
Right, so it's that same kind of principle.
Interesting. So then what about evocation? How is that different?
So evocation is kind of the opposite in a way.
Okay.
Where instead of bringing something into yourself,
Right.
you're projecting something outward.
Okay, so you're kind of sending your will out into the world.
Yeah, you're calling upon something, but you're not necessarily trying to embody it.
Right.
You're trying to direct it.
Okay.
Towards a specific purpose.
So give me an example of that. Like, what would be a...
Sure. So, like, a classic example would be like, a magical ritual to bring about a change in the weather, right?
Okay.
So you're not trying to become the storm.
Right.
You're trying to direct the storm.
Right. Okay.
Or you're trying to influence the forces that govern the weather.
Interesting. So it's more about, like, influencing something outside of yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about projecting your will into the world.
Okay. So we've got invocation, we've got evocation. Those are two pretty big ones.
Yeah, those are two of the, I guess you could say, like the primary tools in the magician's toolkit.
And Crowley talks about these not just in terms of like, again, like a ritual setting.
Right.
But also in terms of how we're interacting with the world all the time.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, he saw these as principles that are operating on all levels of reality.
Okay.
So even if you're not, consciously doing a ritual.
Right.
You're still engaging in these dynamics.
So, like, give me an example of that. Like, how would we see that in everyday life?
Sure. So let's say you're trying to persuade somebody of something.
Okay.
Right. You're essentially engaging in a form of evocation.
Okay.
You're trying to project your ideas, your arguments, your energy into their mind.
Interesting.
And hoping that they will, take root and grow.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So it's not literally magic.
Right.
But it's the same kind of principle at work.
Okay, that's interesting. So he's really like kind of taking these magical ideas and applying them to
everyday life,
to psychology, to
everything.
To everything. Wow.
Yeah, he saw this as like a universal system.
Okay, and so I guess that kind of leads into another big concept in Crowley's work. Okay. Which is this idea of the body of light.
Right.
So what is that all about?
Right. So the body of light, this is a really key concept in Crowley's system.
Okay.
And it's something that he actually inherited from, earlier traditions.
Okay.
But he kind of systematized it and really fleshed it out.
Oh, okay.
And essentially, the body of light it's like a subtle body.
Okay. So not our physical body.
Not our physical body, but a body of energy.
Okay.
That's kind of coextensive with our physical body.
Okay.
But it can also extend beyond the physical body.
Interesting.
And it's the vehicle through which we interact with these other realms of existence.
Okay, so it's almost like our astral body or our...
You could say that, yeah, it's often associated with the astral body.
Okay.
And it's the vehicle through which we experience things like, dreams, visions, out-of-body experiences.
Okay, and so Crowley believed that this body of light, it's not something that we're just born with,
Right.
like fully formed.
Right. He believed that it's something that we have to develop through practice.
Through these practices.
Through these
right?
practices, exactly, yeah.
So how do we develop our body of light, according to Crowley?
Well, he had a lot of different techniques.
Okay.
But I think some of the key ones are, things like visualization,
Okay.
meditation, ritual work.
Okay, so it's about kind of training your mind.
Yes, it's about training your mind. It's about training your imagination.
Okay.
Because he believed that the body of light is essentially, it's made of thought stuff.
Okay.
It's made of the energy of consciousness.
Interesting.
And so by training your mind, you're essentially strengthening
your body of light.
Your body of light, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so this is getting pretty out there.
It is. It is.
But it's also kind of fascinating, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's like it's taking these ideas that have been around for a long time in mysticism and occultism, and kind of trying to give them a practical
framework.
A framework, yeah, for how we can actually apply them in our lives.
And I think that's one of the things that's so appealing about Crowley.
Okay.
Is that he wasn't just content to talk about these things in abstract terms.
Right.
He wanted to give people tools.
Okay.
That they could use
to actually experience
these things for themselves,
to create change in their lives.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've talked about invocation, evocation, the body of light.
Right.
But I think we also have to address the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Which is that Crowley is a very controversial figure.
Yes, he is.
And I think a lot of that controversy stems from, his personal life,
right.
his reputation.
His reputation, yeah.
And also some of the things that he wrote about.
Yes.
That people found to be, shocking or offensive.
Right, and I think it's important to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
He was a product of his time. He was also, a very
a complex figure.
A complex figure, to say the least.
Yeah.
And so, we can't just dismiss him out of hand.
Right.
Because of some of the things that he said or did.
Right.
But we also have to be, critical and discerning.
And approach his work with a critical eye.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess where do we go from here? Like, how do we reconcile the power of his ideas with the controversy that surrounds him?
I think that's the challenge with studying anybody who is as out there as Crowley was.
Right.
And I think it's a balancing act.
Yeah.
We have to be able to hold both of those things in mind.
You're right.
At the same time.
Okay.
And I think ultimately it's up to each individual.
Okay.
To decide how they want to approach his work.
Right.
But I think there's no denying that he was a brilliant thinker.
Yeah.
He was a powerful magician.
Right.
And he left behind a body of work that is still relevant and influential today.
Yeah, and I think, even if we don't agree with everything he said, I think there's a lot that we can learn
absolutely
from studying his work.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things that I find really interesting about Crowley is that he was really interested in pushing the boundaries of human experience.
Absolutely, yeah. He was all about exploring the limits of human potential.
Yeah. And I think, even if we don't want to go to the same extremes that he did, I think there's something to be said for that spirit of exploration.
Absolutely.
Right? Like for not being afraid to see what's possible.
To question everything.
To experiment. And I think, that's something that we can all kind of take inspiration from.
Absolutely.
Even if we don't agree with all of his methods or his conclusions.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that Crowley said that I always come back to is the word of sin is restriction.
Okay.
And I think, that's something that's really important to keep in mind.
Okay.
When we're approaching any kind of spiritual practice or any kind of exploration of consciousness is that we don't want to limit ourselves by preconceived notions or by fear.
Right. Okay. So I think that's a good place to maybe start to wrap things up.
Okay.
But I want to kind of come back to this idea of Crowley as a controversial figure.
Right.
Because I think there are people who are going to listen to this.
Right.
And they're going to say, look, this guy was a terrible person.
Right.
He did a lot of bad things.
Right.
Why should I even bother engaging with his ideas?
Right. And I think that's a valid question.
Yeah.
And I think, it's not my place to tell anybody what to think or how to feel about Crowley.
Okay.
But I think, what I would say is this.
Okay.
We don't have to condone someone's behavior in order to learn from them.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
And I think, there are plenty of examples throughout history of people who have done terrible things, but who have also produced great art or great ideas or great inventions.
Right.
And so, I think it's up to us to be able to kind of separate the art from the artist, the ideas from the individual,
and to recognize that, like you said, like people are complex,
exactly,
and we can learn from both the good and the bad.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I think, with Crowley, I think it's important to be aware of the controversy, to be aware of the criticisms, but also to not let that prevent us from engaging with his work.
Exactly.
Because I think, there's a lot there.
There is.
That's worth exploring.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's a good place to leave it for today. But, I hope that this has been a helpful introduction to Crowley's system of magic.
Me too.
And, if you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to check out his book, Magick in Theory and Practice.
Absolutely.
And, do your own research. Come to your own conclusions.
Exactly.
And see what you think.
Yeah, because ultimately, the best way to understand Crowley is to read him for yourself.
Right.
And to experiment with his idea.
And to see what resonates with you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
It has.
And until next time.
See you later.
It's a lot to wrap your head around, right? Like, on the one hand, you have this figure who's associated with all these, scandalous stories and, pushing the boundaries of morality.
Right. He definitely had that reputation.
But then on the other hand, you have these ideas that he's presenting that are, fundamentally about, self-empowerment and, taking control of your reality.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what makes him so fascinating is that he embodies that kind of, that tension.
Totally.
Between the light and the shadow, the sacred and the profane.
Right. And he wasn't afraid to kind of go there,
No, he was not afraid to go there at all.
He was willing to kind of explore those dark corners.
Yeah. And to really kind of challenge people's assumptions about everything. Exactly.
What is spirituality? What is morality? What is possible for human beings?
Exactly. And I think, whether you agree with his conclusions or not, you have to admire his willingness to ask those questions.
Totally, and to really put it all out there.
Yeah, and to really kind of put his whole being into it,
Right. He wasn't holding back.
No, not at all.
And I think, that's something that you can say about a lot of the great thinkers and artists throughout history, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, the people who really make an impact are the ones who are willing to kind of bleed for their art.
Totally. To really put themselves out there and
to be vulnerable.
And to risk rejection, ridicule. Because they believe in what they're doing.
Exactly.
And I think, whether you agree with Crowley or not, you can't deny that he really believed in what he was doing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. He was completely committed to his path.
Yeah.
And to his vision.
Yeah. And I think, that's something that's really inspiring, even if
you don't agree with the specifics.
Yeah, just that willingness to really go for it,
Yeah, to really kind of step into your power.
Yes.
And say this is who I am.
This is what I believe.
And I'm not afraid to share it with the world.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to maybe wrap things up.
Okay. Yeah.
But I really, really appreciate you, coming on and talking about this with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a really fun conversation.
It has. It's been really interesting.
Yeah, Crowley's always a trip.
He is. He's always a trip.
Yeah.
But yeah, so for folks who are listening, if you're interested in learning more about Aleister Crowley, about his system of magic.
Yeah, definitely check out his writings.
Yeah, go to the source, read Magick in theory and practice.
That's the best place to start.
Yeah, and see what you think.
Yeah, keep an open mind.
Keep an open mind, yeah. And maybe Crowley will surprise you.
You never know.
You never know. All right. Well, thanks again for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And for everyone listening, until next time, keep exploring those weird and wonderful corners of reality.
And keep the magic alive.
Absolutely. Take care.